We've been looking at the book of hope, which I call the book of Jonah. We have seen God's patience with Nineveh and with his prophet Jonah. We've seen God's prodding, his providence, his preservation. We see God's prophet's rededication and being renewed to his calling. We see the prophet's preaching. And today we're going to see the perfecting of the prophet. In Jonah chapter 4, and I encourage you to read it, in Jonah chapter 4, you very obviously see that Jonah had not arrived. Jonah was like the little boy standing in the back of a car, and his mother was saying, he says, "Johnny, you sit down, or I'm going to stop the car and give you a spanking." Well, Johnny didn't stand down. And since she said it again, and he still didn't sit down. And so finally she stopped the car and she said, "You don't sit down. I'm going to go back there and I'm going to spank you." And Johnny sat down. And then Johnny said, "I'm sitting on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside." And that kind of describes what Jonah was like. Jonah had been rebellious, he had a rotten attitude, he'd been on the run, and now he is a reluctant witness. He was like the man who said, "Vengeance is the Lord's, and I want a front row seat." That reflected his attitude. But here's the good news out of this text. God uses imperfect people, because if God did not use imperfect people, then God could not use you, and he could not use me. For sure he couldn't use me. And God honored his word. So there is hope that God can use us even though we have not arrived. I think about that little chorus that says, "He's still working on me." It goes a little bit like this: "There really ought to be a sign across my heart saying, 'Don't judge me yet. There's an unfinished part.' How loving and patient he must be. He's still working on me." That is so true. And in Philippians in chapter 1 and verse 6, it tells us he's going to work on us until we're perfect. It says, "Being confident of this very thing, that he hath begun a good work in you, will perform it until the day of Christ Jesus," until we have arrived. We see the perfecting process in Jonah chapter 4, that God blessed him with comfort in the heat of the sun. As he sit back to watch the destruction of Nineveh, God gave him great comfort. But then Jonah became bitter when God removed the gourd, and he reflected his anger and his attitude. And then he was rebuked, and he learned a lesson. And God rebuked him and said, "Shouldn't I care about that great city? And 120,000 innocent children. They don't know their left hand from the right hand, including the cattle." The result was he learned his lesson. Evidence that he learned his lessons is found in the 90s, that we find out that ISIS, in their destructing mode, they destroyed the tomb of Jonah. Where was it? It was at Nineveh. So evidently Jonah had a change of heart, and he stayed there in Nineveh to minister to the people that initially he had hated and wanted their destruction. Ruth Graham has on her tombstone, it said this: "End of construction. Thank you for your patience." God's working on us, and therefore there is hope. And what a fitting way to end this study in the book of Jonah with that statement: end of construction. Thank you for your patience. I pray that this study in the book of Jonah has been a blessing to you as it is a blessing to me. I've done everything very brief. There's lots of things there to be thinking about. But walk away from this knowing there is hope.